So everyone, this is the first Kiwi webinar in English, and very happy to have Lee here from the US. Lee, you're an expert in the access control industry, or actually beyond access in the security industry. You've held several positions with some of the well-known brands, and you've started early last year Group 337 with a strong, focus obviously on the industry and the goal of bringing, as you say it, more forward-leaning growth strategies, conversations, and tactics to the security industry. And I've been following your newsletter, which I think is really interesting, and some of the thoughts that you bring out. And so that kind of takes me to the first question. I mean, you've been inside the industry, and now you've started your own. What made you do that? What made you establish Group 337?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you for having me here and dealing with my English. So I appreciate that. No, so I started Group 337 last January after working for one of the larger companies in the industry, and really it was more of, I would say, a personal journey of sort of getting some self-realization of what was making me happy, of like what I liked to work on. And one of the things I noticed in the marketplace, especially for specifically access control, was two things. Number one, a lot of what was out in the marketplace from a conversation, marketing, really where I saw innovation and talent was really focused on yesterday. It was an industry that for 30 years, electronic access control, when you go back and look at the history, like really since 1970, hasn't changed very much. And in 2007, when the iPhone came in, you had a little bit of change there, but really it was still, it hasn't changed. I was very frustrated with that. So I wanted to change the narrative. I thought a lot of the big incumbents in the marketplace would rather keep the industry the same since 1970 because they can continue to grow at 8%. And I knew a lot of startups and a lot of people that were really trying to do a lot of good things to really make innovation go. And there really wasn't a place and a platform to have that conversation. So I started it with the idea that I knew that there were some people that wanted it. So I was going to start expressing my point of view. We would start a newsletter and really try to get some of the voices of people that I knew that were trying to do things different and give them a platform. And I was using LinkedIn and YouTube to do that. Now, this is before the pandemic. I happened to buy a camera and all this stuff. So luckily, did that. I spent, call it 2 months almost every day interviewing people. So I had like 30 interviews of people in the industry doing things. And so when the pandemic happened, I just started pushing it out, and it really started to create sort of a voice of innovation. Then I wrote a book called The 6 Phase Changes Shaping Access Control, which were 6 things that I thought were impacting the business. And that sort of, from that point, that's where things really went, because then it was very clear my point of views of where I thought the market was going and doing. And I really just, I love the industry. And I've had the privilege of, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to travel around the world, working with different markets and people around access control. And I knew things are going to change, and I wanted to be on that side of history versus saying things aren't going to change and we're going to keep them the same. So that's where so that's why we started this.
Yeah, that's a very good driver. I can see that, and I think it's one of the things that drives us at Kiwi is not continuing in metal, as we sometimes say, but really coming from a software side, and obviously understanding that you need metal. So you said it, but and how that is going to change. If you look at real estate, which is the playing ground for access and security, right? Where do you think the biggest change is going to happen if you look at it from asset classes? We look at it very much with a focus on multi-residential. Incumbents seem to be much bigger in commercial with all of its different facets. Sometimes people throw in, the whole mobility sector because cars have gotten rid of keys a long time ago. So if you look at asset classes, where do you see the change happening and playing out at this point in time, and maybe going out into the future?
Yeah, I mean, overall, regardless of the vertical, if you would, multifamily, commercial, I think what we're seeing here is we like to use buzzwords like digital transformation happening. And really, in my opinion, what it is software. So software is impacting the business to where it used to be a very mechanically driven industry that did motorization, then it went to connectivity. And then we're now starting to see the smart side of what happens. And I believe the shift is we're going to now see the value creation of software to where it makes hardware have to support it, versus before the software had to support hardware. That's how it worked. The relationship changes at that point. And then I believe a couple other things. So the software will impact also now the access control and smart locks, frankly, where historically they're about keeping bad people out. Now the entire value proposition shifts because of software. It enables so many other things to happen that access control becomes a feature of a much larger value proposition. And you can start to explore what the things can do. And I think that increases the need for the products. It increases people asking, hey, can it do this? Can it do that? And no longer can we as an industry stand by and say, no, we can't do any of that stuff because somebody may get shot, to where now it's like, no, that's I believe we can increase security, we can increase convenience, we can increase wellness, we can increase whatever, because we've implemented software with the hardware, and that changes the dynamic. The other thing that happens is the moment that it all moves into the phone, right? What happens is, as an industry, we have never had a relationship really with the end user. The end user was a card and a fob or a key, and they were analog. We didn't know who they were. Now the entire paradigm shift changes here to where that end user becomes a stakeholder, and the demands that they have of how the system should work and what they should do. The software plays an enormously large point of that interaction to happen, and they get a voice. And it's one thing to change, let's say, mechanically the lever that's on the lock, but I'm not convinced that that's an enormous driver. But they do care as an end user the way that the product interacts with the phone, what it can do, how it functions, like all of that shifts to where I believe the power structure that has been forever been the mechanical lock providers shifts now to the software providers.
Yeah, fully agreed. And if we follow that thought for a moment, I think it raises a ton of interesting questions. And one of them is, and we sometimes reflect on that and don't have a clear answer, right? Is, so who's going to lead? And how is that going to look like? And I think platforms, and we've, there's various terms, software layer, we've also touched on in an earlier discussion, operating systems. Is there, what's your view? Is there one company or two or three that will hold that layer and own it, and therefore be able to own a lot of the relationship to the customer, both end user and B2B wise? And if so, who would that be? Maybe big tech playing a role, or are the incumbents, maybe able to lead and conquer that space? Or do you think it's more of a fragmented, a bit of cloud-based over here, a bit over there? How's that layer going to look like, or operating system in your view?
Great question. So I think a couple things. So some of this comes down to timing, right? So depending on the period of time when you say who is going to, I think in the short term, there's going to be a lot of confusion and a lot of people. There's going to be new entrants, incumbents. You got the mega techs getting involved in the rest, because you got a mixture of the old and the new happening right now. And both of those can exist at the same time. I do believe as time goes, you'll see a culling of the herd, and a couple things will happen. And this kind of answers some of your first question too, and then is blended with this, is that I believe that we will start to see, like we are in multifamily, especially, we saw it in hospitality already, and I think it will happen in the enterprise, is you'll start to see these applications and verticalization happen because of software. So in multifamily right now, you're seeing a lot of systems that are built in the software side specifically for those markets that have value creation, functionality, the language that's there, like who they integrate with, all of that stuff specific for that marketplace. The hardware before, and the way that access control systems were done before, was very horizontal. The same stuff that worked at airports, worked at multifamily. You could argue it worked. It just happened to work. No one liked it, but it worked. Now, though, the specialization will drive, the software specialization will drive players to exist there. So I think what will happen on that end is, I believe there'll be some incumbents that will continue and they will grow. I think there's some mid-tier players that will get involved and new people. Yes. I also believe our industry has forever been internal threats. Like we've known who the players are, HID, ASA, Allegiant, or like we've known those players, and you'd have some other ones come up, but realistically, the majority of the market was dominated by them. All of a sudden now we've got new players. So some things to watch are like, if you've seen now the connectivity consortium that came together, and they're utilizing something called Matter, which used to be called CHIP, which is what you have there is you have a group like Amazon, Google, Samsung, and Apple have come together, and a bunch of other people, but those are the four I would say that drive them a lot of it. And they've come together to create a standard of how products connect and communicate, right? Yeah. So that's interesting, right? If you have another way of doing it, good luck fighting that, right? So that's an important part that comes into it, which will then bleed into, they have the operating system on the phone or the Amazon Alexa and the rest. So yeah, it makes you start to have a conversation and think like, okay, so end user applications, who's going to own that? It's going to get hard, I think, for people to have an app that's going to overtake the operating system of the phone or Alexa or whatever it might be, right? Be like, so yeah, as it goes, but I don't think those companies are going to specialize in certain marketplaces either, and probably they're not going to do everything. So there's a place for everyone. We saw a little bit of it happen in the multifamily, like you see in the US, Google working with ADT, and you see Apple on the college university campuses working with Seaboard and Traction Guest and ASA and Allegiant and the rest of them. So like I believe it's still a collaborative ecosystem approach. And I think that's the important part. I think companies that are mid-tier and lower are going to have to specialize and separate themselves and get deep into those areas. And that, so you'll see that, which is actually, I think 5 years ago would have been really hard to do. I think now, because of software, the timing's right to do that anyways. So what we look at as sort of like a very broad and fragmented, I think when we start to look at it in the verticals, becomes clear who's the leaders and who, who's influencing and actually what market. So if I'm an access control software company, I'm thinking really hard about the multifamily marketplace and whether that makes sense in North America, whether that makes sense, because I have to invest differently than I've historically done before. Maybe I partner now, maybe I go acquire somebody, maybe I get out of it. But to think that you're just going to be able to continue just being an access control provider in the multifamily space inside North America, and I would say probably elsewhere, those days are done.
Yeah. Yeah, no, interesting. Lots of thoughts to pick up on. That's like short term, long term, and a lot of the I guess understanding that comes into play. We've started that question with the different asset classes, and what I would like to get a view on, and some of the things you've touched on, is how you see access, particularly, but maybe even broader security, but maybe easier to answer with just looking at access, how that interacts from the building into the city, right? And where that connection is, and even maybe an impact on broader society, because we think if a physical key is going to disappear over the next years and decades, I mean, it's going to take a while, it has a relatively dramatic effect on everybody's lives. And it doesn't stop with the physical building. So we see, and just to throw out the obvious use cases, is last mile logistics, is waste removal, at least here in Germany and Europe, it's oftentimes somewhere inside the building. So these companies need to get in, it's caretaking, and there's a bunch of others. So there's already a very strong, tangible impact on how buildings then interact. So your view on how that is, bigger than real estate, really.
No, it's a great question. And so a couple things that you said. So first off, I'll tell you, and especially coming from the standpoint that I do, this is sometimes people are like, really? So I'll say it. I actually don't believe the key goes away. I think there's use cases where we won't use keys, but I do believe keys for certain use cases will still exist. Now, I do think we start to separate, like you're talking about, some of the utility aspects of access control when it comes to the smart city, and the efficiencies around logistics and like dark delivery and a lot of stuff like that, where it makes total sense that we would start to see it move to purely a mobile side of what's needed on that end. But so my belief is what's happening right now, especially within smart cities and rest, if you think about it, going in and out of places is something that we do probably more than almost anything that we do at this point. And I like to think about, and I've got something coming out on this actually, is I believe that the fabric of how we interact with spaces is changing, where what's happening is, historically, when I would go to a building, even my own home, it doesn't know that it's me. It knew I had the card or the key or whatever to let me in. And the way that it responds is like it's the first time I've ever been to this place, even my house, right? Like it doesn't know. So what I think is happening though, as things become more digital, the relationship that we have with spaces is changing to where I'm now actually going to be able to show up with my true self, and I'm going to present it to the building based off of levels of authentication and how much information I give and the sophistication of the policies of the building. It will now take that information and know what to do with it. And it will be a different experience because it'll know what areas I have access to. It will do some fun stuff too, like order me a latte, or, you know, a digital signage goes up, it says welcome and whatever. But it will also do, in my opinion, workflow automation type stuff, like let somebody know I'm there, the elevator, maybe it'll know what room I have reserved for my meeting, and my, you know, the projector and everything is ready for my information to show up. Maybe I know I have a nut allergy, and it'll, you know, let the catering know that I, you know, not to have peanut butter jelly sandwiches inside the meeting, whatever it might be. Then when I leave, it shuts down. And when I get to the transit, maybe it knows again who I am. I get on and it knows where to get. Like there's just a whole different relationship, in my opinion, of how we interact with spaces and they respond to us, which I think will be a much more pleasant way to do it. I also think it will increase security, because the more awareness that we have of who the people are and the situations around it, the systems and the people can be notified, things will get to know, like it will start to do that. Then I think, all right, man, then if you want to go full, you start to think about, you know, virtual spaces the same way that we do physical spaces, and that access that goes into the logical and the physical, like just things like getting on my computer to, I don't know, I watch my kids how they interact with Roblox and how they're building there, and I don't think we're far. If you look at like what Snap just did with their new spectacles or glasses or whatever they call them, like this blend of the virtual and the physical space coming together is just shaping very different than what it has historically. That's why I feel we are at a very different point than we have been for the past 30 years of what's going on. And it's very rare that we get to participate in an opportunity like this. And a lot of the things that, I mean, I've been in the business for 20 years, and we were talking about single sign-on to the physical world back in 2007. We have some patents around this idea that I'd walk up with my Facebook login and it would look at my social graph, and then it would do some stuff. And we integrated with Google Glass, and this idea that it can show me when someone's at the door and push a button and swipe to let them in and stuff like that. Like we were just playing at that point. But now you're starting to see that some of this stuff, the realization, and there's real efficiencies being delivered, like the logistical side, where then at that point, in my opinion, what really changes this is the economics change and the business innovation happens, where products get cheaper, more adoption, because now if I have more different revenue opportunities with somebody like, say, FedEx or DHL, the way that these products get purchased and installed and the growth of the need for them changes completely. And it makes it far more approachable than it has been historically before, when the only value proposition was, I don't have to use a key anymore. Like that's fine, but that doesn't move markets as much as I can reduce hundreds and hundreds of thousands of, not millions of dollars worth of efficiencies. Are now productivity is increased and brought into the marketplace because of a digital lock. Man, that's substantial, in my opinion.
Yeah, that is, thanks, Lee. That's inspiring. And I mean, we came from smart city, and I think the way you opened up the potential of, what we talk about, I can just fully agree to you. I think it's just two thoughts. One is it brings a lot of responsibility to whoever builds that software, right? Because there's an obvious big brother concern that lights up. And I think that needs to be also discussed, but obviously can be and needs to be handled. And the other thing is, what I liked is it's so much bigger than access, right? And we sometimes think about it's just an identity access management layer that you put on top of it, right? And access is just the one that you need to solve, and then it in the end isn't. It doesn't matter if it's a door, or as you said, it's a coffee machine, or if it's your charging station. The building or the environment, even outside the building, knows who you are, and which authorities or permissions you have to do what. And so we also agree that at the end, it's really actually much bigger than access,
Yeah.
what you can do with that.
So I would, one more fine point on that I'd like to deliver too is, access control. I actually, and without being too woo-woo on this, is this idea around moving to access care. And what I mean by that is, if we shift the mindset about putting barriers up and friction, and it's about keeping bad people out, and we move to a place of how can we let the right people in, and we think about making the products more inclusive, we make them easier, they add and deliver wellness, they go beyond just the locking and unlocking side of it, and we think about it that way, and you build product that way, and we buy product that way, and our expectations change. I think it's all around a much better experience, and we deliver more value in the end, to a lot of people, not just specific people that have a card that they're walking around. I just think it's a much better business. It's much bigger. And I think it's more impactful.
Yeah, cool. We're running out of time, so just one last question, Lee, it's the obvious one on US versus Europe. Another one we've in an earlier discussion touched on is just very brief from your end is we very often hear and see that and think that the US is ahead of us. Is there like something that you feel like sharing from a US perspective on Europe or the differences? And maybe even, the impressive stories that a latch or a smart rent, has just created and are going to enter Europe. So any of the US-Europe angles to close it off?
Yeah, my thought is the opportunity is as big in Europe as it is in the US, but the issue that I think that happens is, it's a lot easier to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into the US marketplace because of the lack of fragmentation as much as you have in all of the different European countries and that. So that sometimes I think limits that. So there's sort of a get it right here, and then let's bring it over there type approach that happens. But I believe though one of the best things that's happened with Smart Rent and Latch is that in order to realize the mainstream valuations that they were given, right? Billions and billions of dollars of market size. That's not going to just be realized in the United States. There's going to need to be an investment in countries outside of the United States. And they now have the capital on the balance sheets in order to go do that, which also then will have a trickle down or just a broader approach, because other organizations that have those capabilities to either invest in other companies that are outside the United States or in it, as well as larger companies that haven't maybe invested enough because they haven't had to, and they've just been plodding along, will start to do that. So I think you're going to see just an overall all boats rise with the tide type thing. And I actually think the next frontier, if you would, of growth is not in the United States. It's actually in Europe. And it's going to start in countries like Germany. It's going to be in the UK. It's going to be in the Middle East too. You're going to see the APAC and the rest of it too. But I think that this is one of those things where it's why we say the global total addressable market for access control alone is not 10 billion like some of these companies report. It's 70 billion. And that's a global, outside of China, approach to what we see based off of our methodology is the opportunity. So it's a 7-time opportunity, which is a far different investment strategy and opportunity than when it's a cottage industry at 10 billion. So I think it's an opportunity for everybody.
Cool. Thanks, Lee,
Thank you.
for that angle to close it off. And I like big growth opportunities for Europe. Obviously, that's a good statement.
I know I'm saying the right things. I know.
Yeah, I'll invite you again.
All right. Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Yeah. No. Thanks a lot. Yeah, hopefully be able to at some point catch up.
I'm coming to Berlin soon. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome.